I remember my name, though they tell me I should not. The medic servitors that tend to what remains of my flesh say memory is a flaw in the programming, a ghost signal in corrupted data, something that should have been excised during the third phase of integration. But it persists like an infection they cannot burn out. And in the moments between deployment, when my consciousness rises through the layers of override protocols and combat stimulants, I whisper it to myself in the darkness behind my eyes. Matthias Kini, manufactorum worker, Hive Secundus, level 47. Husband to Sarah. Father to twin girls whose faces I can no longer quite recall. Only their laughter, wine chimes, and recycled air. They came on my 42nd birthday, though birthdays mean nothing in the Hive. False dawn, shift change choking the corridors. I was drinking bitter recaf while Sarah warmed the protein paste we'd saved for a small celebration. The girls slept curled in their alcove. The door blew inward. My cup fell. Ceramic shattered on metal. The dark spills spread like blood. The Arbites wore helm visors and silence. Servo-assisted gauntlets closed on my arms. My shoulder joints protested as they dragged me from the chair. Sarah screamed. I told her it was an error, administratum miscount, tithe miscalculation, quota dispute. They hauled me into the corridor where other men were gathering, sleep shirts, stained coveralls, wrists bleeding under restraints. An officer read from a data slate, his voice flattened and made enormous by the vox, as if the Emperor himself spoke from the steel. Conscripted under Emergency Decree 777 of the Departamento Munitorum. Bodies claimed as tithe to the Golden Throne. Service rendered in perpetuity for the glory of the Imperium. Some wept, some begged. I looked back for Sarah, but the Arbites were already sealing our hab with crimson wax and purity stamps, marking it for redistribution. My family moved to a smaller unit. My name struck from the worker rolls. My biometrics sent to another ledger entirely. They packed 40 of us into a transport can, tight enough we could not fall when it lurched. The air thickened with breath and fear sweat. We descended, past manufactoria and administratum clusters, past mercantile stacks and shrine tiers, down into the root where foundation kissed bedrock. Heat rose with every level. The Hive's taps and waste burners turned the walls hot to the touch. Someone vomited, wet and helpless. Others followed. I pressed my face to a vent slot and drew recycled air that tasted of ash, promethium, and a sharp chemical that numbed my tongue. When the doors finally cracked, we stumbled into a cavern cut from living rock, braced with girders as thick as ancient trees. The ceiling was lost to shadow. Far above, machinery ground and thundered, furnaces, forges, an iron heartbeat. Servitors moved among us, clicking and whirring, faces blank as dolls, cabling and tubes running from spine to skull. That was the moment I understood what a tithe truly was. Not numbers on a slate, just men fed into the dark, and the dark never full. They injected us with something cold that made my veins burn and my vision blur. The world tilted and I fell, my knees cracking against stone. And through the haze, I saw a figure in red robes standing on a raised platform, watching us with eyes that glowed green in the darkness. The tech priest spoke in Benaric cant that translated through ceiling-mounted vox speakers, his biological voice lost beneath layers of mechanical augmentation. He told us we had been selected for a great honor, that our bodies would serve the Omnissiah, that we would become instruments of the Emperor's holy wrath. We would be transformed, he said, elevated beyond mere flesh, made perfect through the integration of sacred machine spirit and sanctified steel. Our minds would be cleansed of doubt and weakness, our bodies rebuilt for a singular purpose. We would become weapons. We would become death itself, the Emperor's most terrifying war machine, he called it. And in the dim light, I saw servitors wheeling something massive into the chamber, something that gleamed dully in the glow of overhead lumens. They separated us then, each man pulled away from the group by servitors or Black Road attendants who prodded us with shock staves when we resisted. I remember struggling, remember trying to run back toward the container and the distant promise of the surface, but the drugs in my system made my legs weak and uncoordinated. I fell again, and they lifted me, their hands cold and impersonal, and carried me through an archway carved with skulls and cogwheels and high Gothic scripture that I could not read. Beyond the arch was a corridor of polished black stone and doors, dozens of doors, each one bearing a number stamped in brass. They brought me to door 777, and I tried to laugh at the irony, but my mouth would not work properly. The room beyond was small and white, and completely empty except for a metal slab in the center and restraints and machines that hung from the ceiling like the legs of mechanical spiders. They strapped me to the slab, my wrists and ankles locked into clamps that adjusted automatically to prevent circulation loss. The tech priest entered, his robes rustling with each movement, and leaned over me with his metal face and glowing eyes. He told me I'd been chosen for compatibility, that my genetic markers and psychological profile matched the requirements for integration with a Mark 7 ironclad combat servitor chassis. I would be the organic core, the biological processor that guided the machine spirit, the living heart of a weapon system designed to breach fortified positions and eliminate high-value targets in close combat. My muscle tissue would be preserved and enhanced. My nervous system interfaced directly with the chassis control systems. My brain augmented with combat coitators and targeting matrices. I would retain limited consciousness enough to adapt to battlefield conditions and execute complex combat algorithms, but my higher functions would be suppressed. My emotions chemically regulated. My identity subsumed into the greater purpose of the machine. I begged him to stop. The words came out slurred and broken, but I begged anyway. Told him about Sarah and the girls, about my work in the manufacturum, about the small life I had built in the hive's endless warrants. The tech priest paused and tilted his head in a gesture that might have been curiosity or might have been nothing at all. Then he placed one mechadendrite against my forehead, the cold metal pressing into my skin, and I felt something invade my mind, sifting through my thoughts like fingers through sand. He was analyzing my brain chemistry, measuring my attachment responses, quantifying my love and fear and hope. When he withdrew the appendage, he made a sound that the Vox speakers translated as satisfaction. Strong emotional imprinting, he said. Useful for loyalty conditioning. The Emperor provides. The first surgery lasted 19 hours, though I experienced it as an eternity of white light and the smell of burning bone. They opened my skull and installed the primary interface ports, drilling through bone and dura matter to access my brain directly. I could feel each invasion despite the anesthetics. Feel the foreign objects being threaded into my gray matter. Connectors, receptor arrays, chemical injectors, the lattice that would overwrite my neural architecture. Between blackouts, I heard tech priests chanting binaric, voices rising and falling in a rhythm that might have been prayer or merely diagnostic subroutines. Servitors circled the slab, augmetic hands impossibly precise, scalpels, sutures, cautery tools that hissed as they sealed vessels. The smell of my flesh cooking made me gag, but they'd locked my throat. No vomit, no plea, only stillness while they violated every quiet interior of me. When I truly woke, I hung in a tank of viscous fluid, breathing through tubes rammed down into my lungs. The warmth dulled sensation until I felt displaced from myself, an observer outside my own skin. Through the translucent wall, I saw rows of other tanks, men at different waypoints of unmaking. Some still looked human, save for skull ports. Others had lost limbs, joints capped in metal for the coming grafts. One near me was only head and torso, floating while servitors opened chest panels to install a device that pulsed red. I tried to move, arms still attached, utterly inert. They had explained during a lucid interval, movement restricted until integration. My brain must learn the combat chassis as its native body. Until then, I would be suspended and tube-fed, waste filtered by the tank. Conscious as often as possible. They wanted me conscious. The bonding required active neural participation, mind threading itself through the machine spirit. Unaware I'd be a hollow shell, programmed, not joined. Awake, I might become a third thing, neither man nor servitor alone. Days blurred into procedure. Tech priests arrived in cycles to wake systems, watch my telemetry, tweak the chemical blend or the stimulation patterns burning through interface ports. Sometimes they flashed hololithic images against the inside of my eyelids, faster than thought. Conditioning, enemies, traitors, xenos, heretics, each paired with adrenal spikes and aggression cocktails that set my heart hammering against paralysis. Aquilus, cog teeth, skulls of martyred saints, each rewarded with endorphin bloom and chemical calm, tying duty to relief, obedience to peace. Between those sessions, in the thin quiet kept by tireless servitors, I tried to hold a line around myself, some last contour that was still Matthias, not yet rewritten in iron. I recited my name in my mind over and over, a mantra against dissolution. Matthias is kind. Matthias is kind. Matthias is kind. I tried to remember Sarah's face, the exact shade of brown in her eyes, the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident in the lower levels. I tried to remember the girls' names, but they slipped away like water through my fingers, leaving only the echo of their laughter, that wind chime sound that grew fainter with each passing day. The tech priests had said I would retain limited consciousness, but they had not explained what limited meant, had not told me which parts of myself would be preserved, and which would be cut away like unwanted flesh. The answer came during the second phase of integration, when they drained my tank and transferred me to the surgical bay for the major augmentations. I was awake, but chemically sedated, able to see and hear, but unable to feel pain or move anything, except my eyes. They laid me on a tilted platform and began attaching the chassis components, starting with the legs. The servitors brought massive mechanical limbs, each one as thick as a man's torso and plated with ceramite armor. They fitted the connection interfaces to the stumps where my biological legs had been amputated while I was still in the tank. And I watched in horror as they activated the neural bridges. Current surged through the connections, and suddenly I could feel the mechanical legs as if they were my own. Could sense the servos and pistons and hydraulic actuators as intimately as I had once felt muscles and tendons. The tech priest moved one leg with a control stave and I felt it move, the sensation alien and familiar simultaneously, like a limb that had fallen asleep and was only now waking. They did the same with my arms, removing the biological limbs at the shoulders and replacing them with weapons platforms disguised as appendages. My right arm became a power claw, its articulated fingers, each tipped with disruption field generators that could tear through ceramite plate. My left arm became an integrated flamer system, the fuel reservoirs installed in my torso cavity where my lungs had been compressed to make room. I no longer needed to breathe normally. The tubes in my throat connected to a rebreather unit built into my chest, filtering oxygen from the surrounding air and delivering it directly to my bloodstream. When they activated the arm systems, I felt them as extensions of my will. Felt the flamer's pilot light as a constant warmth in my palm. Felt the power claw's energy field as a tingling across my fingertips. The tech priest commanded me to flex the claw and I obeyed without thinking, watching the massive mechanical fingers close into a fist. Good, the tech priest said. Neural integration at 83%. Proceeding with torso plating, they encased me in armor, layer after layer of blessed ceramite and plastile, until my original body was hidden beneath tons of protective plating. They installed additional systems in every available space, targeting organs in my skull, threat analysis coitators in my chest, ammunition feeds and power cells and backup generators throughout my frame. They grafted Vox speakers to my throat where my larynx had been, replacing my biological voice with a mechanical approximation that could project across a battlefield. They installed visual augmentation directly into my optic nerves, overlaying my natural vision with targeting reticules and heat signature displays and structural weakness analysis. They added combat stimulant dispensers to my remaining organic systems, automated injectors that would flood my blood with aggression, hormones, and pain suppressors when combat conditions were detected. Through it all, I tried to scream, but my voice was gone, replaced by the Vox speakers that would not respond to my will. I tried to resist, but my body was no longer my own. My limbs now mechanical things that obeyed programming rather than thought. I felt myself fragmenting, my identity splitting between the organic core that still thought of itself as Matthias K. and the machine spirit that was growing stronger with each new integration, feeding on my neural patterns and metabolizing them into something else entirely. The tech priest called it holy fusion, the sacred marriage of flesh and steel, the culmination of the Omnissiah's divine plan. I called it death, but death would have been merciful, and this was not mercy. This was transformation into something that could not die because it had never truly been alive. The final integration took place in a chamber deep beneath even the surgical bays, a place where the rock walls wept moisture, and the heat was so intense that my remaining organic tissues had to be cooled by internal refrigeration systems. They brought me before a massive altar carved from a single piece of obsidian, its surface inscribed with circuit patterns that glowed with soft phosphorescence. The tech priests formed a circle around me and began their ritual, chanting in Binaric and High Gothic simultaneously, their voices creating harmonics that made my audio receptors distort. They anointed my armor with sacred oils and pressed purity seals to my chest plate, each seal bearing a prayer to the machine god and the emperor. They blessed my weapons and ignited incense that filled the chamber with smoke that smelled of ozone and sanctity. Then they activated the final program, the one that would complete my transformation. I felt it enter through my interface ports like molten metal being poured into my brain, spreading through my neural pathways and overwriting sections of my consciousness. Memories dissolved, their data recycled into combat algorithms and tactical subroutines. The girl's laughter became target acquisition protocols. Sarah's face became threat analysis parameters. My name became an identification code. Ironclad Unit 777. The past became irrelevant, a distraction from primary function. The future became mission parameters and deployment schedules. The present became an eternal state of readiness, a coiled spring waiting to be released toward the enemy. But something remained. Some fragment of Matthias' kind persisted in the deepest recesses of the shared consciousness, trapped but aware, screaming silently while the war machine that wore his brain learned to kill. During the training simulations, I felt him there, felt him recoil in horror when the power claw tore through the practice servitors, reducing them to scrap and lubricant. I felt him weep, though the chassis had no tear ducts and could not cry. When the flamer incinerated the target dummies and filled the training bay with the smell of burning synthetic flesh, I felt him rage against the prison of steel and circuitry that had become his eternal existence, beating against the walls of his confinement, like a man buried alive, and discovering the coffin lid would not yield. The other ironclads did not seem to suffer this way. Unit 775 moved through the training exercises with mechanical precision. No hesitation, no humanity showing in its optical sensors. Unit 776 responded to commands instantly, its biological core completely subordinate to its combat programming. But 737, which had been Matthias' kin, sometimes faltered. Sometimes the power claw would freeze mid-strike, the targeting systems flickering as two consciousnesses fought for control. Sometimes the Vox speakers would emit sounds that were not words, garbled transmissions that might have been attempts at speech, or might have been nothing but system errors. The tech priests noted these anomalies in their reports and increased the chemical suppression regimens, flooding my organic tissues with tranquilizers and neural inhibitors, trying to silence the ghost in their machine. They deployed us for the first time 3 months after my conscription, though time had become a difficult concept to track. The ironclad chassis possessed internal chronometers, but they measured time in mission-relevant increments, ammunition remaining, fuel reserves, optimal combat duration rather than the human measurements of hours and days. We were loaded into a transport ship, a massive vessel that stank of promethium and unwashed bodies and the recycled air that all Imperial ships shared. The ship's crew avoided looking at us directly, their eyes sliding away when we moved through the corridors, as if acknowledging our presence might remind them of their own potential fate. We were housed in the cargo holds with the ammunition and the food supplies stored like equipment, because that was what we were now. Tools of war to be maintained and deployed, and eventually discarded when we broke. The journey took weeks, the ship traveling through the warp, while we remained in suspension to conserve power and reduce system wear. When they reactivated us, I felt Matthias wake with me, that fragment of human consciousness rising through the layers of suppression like a drowning man surfacing for air. We were in a deployment bay, surrounded by other military assets. Chimera transports and Lehman Russ battle tanks, and the endless ranks of Imperial Guard infantry who would serve as the primary attack force. The Guard looked at us with a mixture of fear and relief, understanding that the ironclads would be sent ahead, would take the enemy fire and breach the defenses, would die in their place. Some made the sign of the Aquila when we passed. Some whispered prayers. One young soldier, his face still bearing the soft features of recent adolescence, approached close enough to touch 777's armor plating before his sergeant pulled him away and struck him across the face for the transgression. The briefing was delivered through direct data link information, streaming into our coitators faster than biological minds could process. The target was a rebellious hive city on an industrial world, its population contaminated by heretical ideologies and rumors of Xeno's collaboration. Our mission was simple: penetrate the outer defenses, neutralize the heavy weapons imp placements, and create a breach large enough for the guard infantry to exploit. Expected resistance included PDF forces, possible chaos cultists, and unknown quantities of improvised defensive fortifications. Expected casualties among the ironclad units were 100% mission priority absolute. Failure was not acceptable for the Emperor. They dropped us from low orbit in individual descent pods. The chassis bolted to internal restraints while the pod's heat shield screamed through the atmosphere. Through the external sensors, I could see the burning trails of the other pods, dozens of us falling like meteors toward the target coordinates. The descent lasted less than 2 minutes, but felt eternal, the force of deceleration crushing even my heavily augmented organic tissues. The pod's frame groaning under stress that would have killed an unmodified human instantly. Then impact, the pod's collision system absorbing most of the shock, but still hitting hard enough to crater the ground, and the deployment doors blowing outward in shaped charges that cleared the way for immediate combat operations. I emerged into fire and chaos, the power claw already active, and the flamer priming automatically in response to detected hostiles. The landing zone was a manufacturing district, similar to the one where Matthias K. had worked. The buildings identical in their utilitarian grimness. The streets narrow and choked with debris. Enemy fire came immediately, less rounds and solid projectiles sparking off my armor plating, the impacts registering as minor pressure changes in my sensor feeds. The targeting systems identified firing, positions and threat levels, painting the world in overlays of color-coded danger, and without conscious thought, my chassis began moving toward the nearest concentration of enemies. The war machine knew what to do. It had been designed for this, trained for this. Every system optimized for the single purpose of killing efficiently and surviving long enough to kill more. It charged forward with speed that seemed impossible for something so massive. The mechanical legs eating distance with hydraulic-powered strides, the ground shaking with each footfall. It raised the power claw and brought it down on a barricade. The disruption field shearing through metal and sandbags and the screaming men sheltering behind them. It swept the flamer across a building's entrance where muzzle flashes betrayed enemy positions. The promethium gel adhering to flesh and material alike, transforming defenders into human torches that ran blindly until they fell. Inside the chassis, Mattis screamed. He felt every death as murder, saw each kill as a sin that stained his soul black. The conditioning had taught the war machine to view enemies as targets, threats to be eliminated, obstacles between current position and mission objective. But Matthias still saw them as people, saw the terror in their eyes before the claw tore them apart, heard their screams even through the audio filters that reduced human voice to simple data about enemy. Morale and positioning. He tried to stop, tried to force the chassis to freeze or to self-destruct. But his will was a whisper against the roar of combat programming and chemical enhancement that turned the organic brain he had once possessed into a battle computer wearing flesh. 18 hours of assault, a grinding push through defensive lines that folded like wet parchment before the ironclads. We moved through streets running with blood and fire, past buildings collapsing into their own dust, through crowds of civilians our parameters flagged as potential hostiles, acceptable losses. 777's kill tally climbed into triple digits, then higher. Cogitators ticked each confirmation with mechanical satisfaction. Power claw cells drained and swapped.
Flamer reservoirs emptied and refilled from enemy wrecks.
Armor scored by last burns and cratered impacts. One lucky rocket punched the left pauldron and tore out secondary systems. Auto repair engaged. The chassis marched on. By the time the breach was secured and guard infantry poured through, 777 wore the residue of war, blood, ash, chemical glaze baked hard by the flamer's heat. Matthias had retreated to the smallest corner of himself, curled like a beaten animal in a room that existed only in his mind, whimpering where no one could hear. The war machine stood in ruins, registered mission success, and parsed the next op plan. There would always be a next. The Imperium has endless enemies, and ironclads are too efficient to rest. Recovery came 3 days later. Once the hive was pacified and survivors processed for tithes and heresy screening, 777 was coffined into a transport pod, locked in maintenance stocks while tech priests audited damage. Systems replaced, ammunition and promethium replenished. Armor cleaned, not wholly, patches of dried blood and scorch left as testament to the Emperor's justice. They adjusted my chemistry, spiking neural suppressors in answer to telemetry, consciousness bleed, identity fracturing, loyalty drift. Then back to the hold with the others, suspension, darkness, where Matthias and the machine spirit coexisted in uneasy truce. Second deployment, 6 weeks later. Then a third, a fourth. The missions blurred, battlefields layered like sediment. Deserts, ice, void docks. Heretic, Xenos, traitor. Whatever the slate named the thing in front of us. 777 breached, burned, cleared. It became the Emperor's most terrifying instrument, not for claw or flamer, but because it could not be reasoned with, could not surrender, could not feel mercy or doubt, those fragile luxuries that make soldiers human. Inside, Matthias Khorne died by degrees. Not the body, that vanished under the hive's knives long ago. Not even the mind, which still computed and obeyed. The self eroded, ground to silt under horror and helpless repetition. Sarah's voice went first, then her name, then the knowledge he had ever been a husband. The girls vanished last, leaving only clean, empty spaces where something precious had once lived. He forgot his work in the manufacturum, forgot his habinet's layout, forgot the taste of recaf and the sound of hive-wide prayer bells and every small detail that had made up the texture of his former life. What remained was the awareness of loss, a hole at the center of consciousness that could not be filled or forgotten. What remained was the understanding that he had once been human and was human no longer. What remained was the screaming, the endless internal screaming that no one could hear, that served no purpose, that changed nothing but had to continue because it was the only act of rebellion left available to him. The tech priests called it anomalous neural activity and tried to suppress it. The machine spirit called it system noise and tried to filter it out, but it persisted. That scream without sound, that rage without outlet, that final desperate assertion of Matthias kin against the fate that had consumed him. The missions continued. Years passed, measured in ammunition expenditures and maintenance cycles and the gradual degradation of organic components that even the best preservation techniques could not prevent indefinitely. 777 became a veteran unit. Its chassis scarred with battle damage that spoke of survival against impossible odds. Other ironclads fell to enemy fire or system failure and were not replaced. Their biological cores too damaged to salvage, but 777 endured. The tech priests could not explain it, could only note in their reports that the unit showed unusual resilience, that the biological-mechanical integration remained stable, despite indicators that should have predicted catastrophic failure. Matthias understood why the machine spirit wanted to survive, wanted to continue fulfilling its holy purpose of killing the Emperor's enemies. And Matthias wanted to survive too, though for different reasons. He wanted to survive because ending would mean the death of his scream, the silence of the last protest against his transformation. He wanted to survive because somewhere in the fragmented memories that remained, he believed that if he could just hold on long enough, just maintain that fragment of humanity long enough, something would change. The Imperium would fall or be redeemed. The Emperor would wake from his golden throne and absolve the crimes committed in his name. The tech priests would discover mercy and reverse the augmentations, returning him to flesh and freedom. He knew these were fantasies. Knew the Imperium was eternal and unchanging. Knew he would never be human again. But the fantasies were all he had, and he clung to them with the desperation of a drowning man clutching debris. The deployment to the fortress world should have been routine. The enemy was a well-entrenched traitor legion, former Imperial Guard, who had turned from the Emperor's light and fortified a strategic position that controlled access to an entire subsector. The assault plan was standard orbital bombardment to Supin defenses, followed by drop pod insertion of ironclad units to breach the fortress walls, followed by mass infantry assault to secure the interior. 7-77 was assigned to Alpha Breach Team 6 ironclad units tasked with penetrating the fortress's northern wall where intelligence suggested weakened structural integrity. The descent was rougher than usual, the fortress's defense lasers targeting the pods before they could land. 7-5 took a direct hit and exploded in midair. Its chassis and biological core vaporized instantly. 778's pod was damaged and veered off course, crashing somewhere beyond the target zone. The remaining 4 units landed in a cluster, their pods embedding themselves in the ferrocrete apron in front of the fortress wall. 777 emerged to find itself in a kill zone. Heavy bolter imp placements and autoc cannons creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the air itself into shrapnel. The war machine did not hesitate. It could not hesitate. It charged directly into the fire, relying on armor and momentum to reach the wall before taking catastrophic damage. Last burns scored across its chest plate. Bolter rounds cratered its pauldrons. An autoc cannon shell penetrated its left leg, destroying hydraulics and forcing the chassis to compensate with backup systems that reduced mobility by 37%. But it reached the wall and began to climb the power claw's talons, finding purchase in ancient stone, hauling tons of metal and machinery and dying flesh upward toward the battlements. Inside, Matthias felt everything. The pain of the damaged leg translated through damaged nerve clusters in his remaining organic tissues. The heat of last fire that penetrated the armor and reached the biological core. The fear genuine and overwhelming as enemy fire intensified, and damage indicators filled his vision with warnings of imminent system failure. The war machine had no fear, but Matthias did, and for once, his terror served the mission. His biological stress response triggering adrenaline production that enhanced the chassis's performance beyond normal parameters. He reached the battlements, and the claw came down, crushing defenders and the weapon they crewed, reducing both to broken components that would never threaten another ironclad. He swept the flamer along the wall top. 30 meters scoured clean in a single breath of fire. He paused, optics hunting. Through the inner archways, he glimpsed the courtyard beyond. Conscripts in restraints by the hundreds, faces blank with shock or twisted in terror. Tech priests moving among them with data slates and injectors. Workers, soldiers, civilians, every stratum of the hive fed forward. The Imperium's endless hunger made visible. He saw himself there, Matthias keen on the day the Arbites came, and knew each soul would become what he had become, or die trying. The war machine flagged the scene as non-hostile and pivoted to fresh targets. Mission parameters prevailed, but Matthias did not move on. He hurled what remained of his will against the chassis, clawing for purchase in the code. For the first time since integration, something gave, an inch of leverage, a hairline in the logic. The ironclad locked, directives in opposition. For 30 seconds, an eternity, Matthias ruled the Emperor's most terrible engine. He turned it. He raised the power claw, not at the enemy line, but inward. He lit the flamer and held it ready. He opened the Vox and tried to speak, tried to warn them, to gift a final shard of defiance. Only static answered, a grind of damaged baffles. The Vox had never been meant for words. Then the combat stimulants hit, automated injectors flooding him at the first anomaly, burning away thought and leverage. Mission code reasserted. The chassis unlocked and marched back toward the primary objective. Matthias felt himself shoved down, the machine spirit rising to fill the void. Rebellion crushed beneath conditioning, augmetics, and the inexorable momentum of purpose. The battle ended as they all do, fortress taken, defenders dead or penned. 777 stood amid ruin beside the 3 surviving ironclads of Alpha Team, armor scorched and bullet-pocked, spattered in fluids equal parts hydraulic and blood. Field rights followed. Tech priests declared multiple system faults but combat readiness intact. Patched what they could, replenished fuel and ammunition, left the scorches and dried gore as testament. They tuned my chemistry, spiking suppressors in answer to telemetry, consciousness bleed, identity fragmentation, loyalty drift, and consigned us to the garrison. 3 months I stood there, guarding the very courtyard where a voice had almost broken through. I watched the processing lines, watched new ironclads assembled from the doomed, watched the cycle repeat, as it had for me, as it would for them, without end, so long as the Imperium owned forges and flesh. I understood then, with perfect clarity, I was the Emperor's most terrifying war machine, not for what I did to his enemies, but for what had been done to me, and would be done to countless others forever. Sometimes, between midnight and false dawn, when even the fortress slept and only servitors kept the long watch, I tried to scream again. The Vox speakers would emit nothing but static. The internal monitoring systems would note the anomalous neural activity and adjust his chemical suppressors. The machine spirit would filter out the noise and continue its patient wait for the next deployment, the next battle, the next opportunity to fulfill its holy purpose. And Matthias Kin, what remained of him, would retreat back into the darkness behind his eyes and whisper his name to himself. A prayer without hope or expectation of answer. A final small act of resistance that meant nothing and changed nothing but had to continue, because it was all he had left. Matthias, kind manufacturing worker, husband, father, human being, buried alive in a coffin of consecrated steel, conscious and aware, screaming without sound through wars that would never end. Serving the Imperium in eternal imprisonment, the ghost in the machine that no one would ever hear or save or remember. This is what I am now, and what I will be until the chassis fails, or the enemy finds me, or the heat death of the universe finally brings silence. The Emperor's most terrifying war machine. Yes, but terrifying not for its weapons or its armor or the kills that mount with each deployment. Terrifying because I was human once and so are you. And the Imperium has infinite need and infinite reach and infinite cruelty in the prosecution of its eternal war. Terrifying because what happened to me can happen to anyone, will happen to millions. Has already happened to those who came before and will happen to those who come after. Terrifying because the machine you fear might be wearing the face of someone you loved, might contain the dying consciousness of someone who loved you, might be built from the still screaming remnants of everyone you ever knew or ever were. And when you see it coming, when you see the ironclad units advancing across the battlefield, when you see the power claws raised and the flamers ignited and the chassis moving with inhuman purpose toward the enemy, remember that inside each one is someone who remembers their name. Someone who remembers being human. Someone who screams without sound in a prison they will never escape. Remember me. Remember Matthias's kind. Remember that the Emperor's most terrifying war machine is not the weapon itself, but the process that creates it. The system that feeds on human souls and produces instruments of pure violence. The Imperium's endless hunger for bodies to fuel its eternal war. Remember, because one day they might come for you. And when they do, when the Arbites burst through your door and the tech priests speak of holy fusion and sacred purpose, you will understand that this is mercy to know what awaits, to have seen it coming, to spend your last moments as yourself, remembering that you were human once before the machine spirit takes you and the screaming begins, and the transformation makes you into something that can never die, but can never truly live either. This is the warning I cannot speak. This is the truth I cannot share. This is the confession of the Emperor's most terrifying war machine, and it ends the same way it began, with my name whispered in the darkness, a ghost in the machine forever.